Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Dragonus Podcastus. I am your host, Deadponic. I have changed back my name because I decided Tiffany's no longer a good name anymore. And of course, I'm joined by Queen Byron. We are. I was planning to visit her kingdom at some point, but I don't know if she actually has a kingdom yet.
It's in the Shadowfell, so it's hard to get to.
Oh, dear lord. All right. Anyway, if you guys enjoy our little podcast here and you want to support us, you can do so at patreon.com/Dragonus Podcastus. Byron, tell them about the little side project you're doing.
Yeah, so I also do actually run games, believe it or not, and I am a part of an amazing team of DMs called Adventure Unbounded. We all run our campaigns simultaneously in the same living world, so there is a strong possibility that you would run into other adventurers while traveling. And if somebody blows up a mountain, you'll hear about it. Likewise, if you blow up a mountain, you have to answer for that. If you're interested, you can find out more about us at adventureunbounded.com.
Yes. So, Byron, do you like nature?
I do.
Would you say you're a tree hugging hippie or no?
I don't know about all that, but I have hugged a tree or two in my day.
Do you like animals?
I do.
Okay. Well, if you like all of that, then I would say like Druid is definitely for you, and we are covering the Druid, which I have to say is our out of the uh out of the spellcasters we've done so far. I would have to say that the Druid is probably one of my favorites
Mm.
because of the way it works. Um, I think I think the best way to describe a druid is basically you're basically one with nature, but at the same time you don't control nature. You kind of just harness its energies.
Hmm.
Um, one thing I find interesting is that there's a lot of like different kinds of druids in media. Like I hadn't considered this, but I was thinking like maybe like Tarzan and George of the Jungle, like they could be considered impromptu druids because of their relationship with nature. That could I mean that theoretically could work. But one big name that sticks out is Radagast the Brown from Lord of the Rings. His willingness to live with animals and his the way he like not necessarily commands his animals, but he basically like takes care of them as if they were his own children kind of thing, is definitely reminiscent of a druid, especially maybe old school druids, but new school druids kind of have this weird connection with nature where they serve it for the greater good. And for me, I think that's something interesting. And in terms of the how a druid is played often depends on their circle, the spells that they run, and basically like their general role. So, uh, what would what would you say is the main selling point of the class usually?
Well, I think that if you want to be able to cast spells, buff, debuff, and do damage, if you want to kind of like you said, harness the power of nature and occasionally shape change into animals themselves, there is an undeniable utility in being able to turn into different creatures. So if that sounds like something that you would like to do, then you should play a druid.
So, do you think the class has a weakness at all, or do you think it seems to be most balanced out of all the classes?
Well, I think there's downsides to any class. The druids are good at one thing at a time, if that makes sense. So there are some really strong wild shape options. However, if you choose one of the other circles, there's one circle that's particularly geared toward wild shapes, and they have kind of a higher restriction. So they have more shapes they can choose from. If you choose one of the other ones, well, you'll have more restrictions, right, and less choices. So if that's something that you're interested in, then you want to choose Circle of the Land, I believe it is, for the wild shapes.
Okay.
Um, but, they do a little bit of anything, but not as well as someone who's specialized for that one task. So they can hit things, right, but a fighter would hit a little better. They can hide, but a rogue would probably do it a little better. They can spellcast and things like that, but that's not necessarily their main focus either. So they have quite kind of a large, repertoire of things that they can do, and they do okay at any of those. But I think that the biggest strength comes from the wild shapes because there are spells and things like that you can use to change into animals, but those come at higher levels. And with the wild shapes, it's an innate ability. And let's say you want to scope out a 3-story building. Well, the druid can turn into a spider and climb up the side and go virtually undetected. I mean, who would notice a spider? That's not outside the norm, right? And then they scope out the building, come back, turn into a human or whatever they were before, turn back, and then they can relay all that information to the party. And then if you have, there's races and other different kinds of abilities that would allow you to speak telepathically to people. You wouldn't even have to change back. You could speak to them as that spider and continue to enjoy the, amazing stealth abilities that a spider would have.
Oh dear God, a telepathic spider? Nope, 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 nope. As an arachnophobe, I can't. I don't do telepathic. I don't do
New
spiders.
fear unlocked.
Yeah. So do you think the class is beginner friendly, or do you think it's more of like an advanced? It's better for like an experienced player.
I do think it is a bit better for an experienced player just because not only do you have, first of all, a lot of choices with the spells that you would choose because they have a generous spell list, but then you come into the wild shapes, and choosing wild shapes can be tricky because you need to pick things that you've seen. Technically, a druid can only turn into an animal that it's seen itself, but there are so many. And there's, like I said earlier, there's restrictions on that based on challenge rating and also swim and fly speeds for the beast that the druid might change into. So there's so many choices and there's a lot of options to choose from. If you are just getting into 5th edition, I might pick something else. But if you have a DM who's played a druid or somebody who's working with you and is ready to help you walk you through all the options, I mean, if you're ready for it, go for it. But there, like I said, there's a lot of choices to be made when you play as a druid.
And what would you say are some of the most common stereotypes that you found playing with druids?
Well, I think you kind of mentioned it in the opening, nature, hippie, tree hugger, that sort of thing. There's actually a circle of druid circle that deals in fires, which, to be fair, is absolutely a natural part of any world and a natural part of the life cycle of a forest or something like that. Fire is a natural thing. There's also Circle of Spores Druid, which again kind of bucks those stereotypes where it's more about fungus and things like that, molds and spores. And it sounds really cute. I mean, mushrooms or whatever, but it's really about necromancy and
Ugh.
about animating things. Well,
Oh.
that's kind of the vibe. So while there are definitely, some druids that play into the stereotypes of nature, peace and love, there are some circles that do not.
Yeah, well, if you want to be a tree hugger, then definitely true is for you. But I would say don't play too much into the tree hugger thing because you might end up accidentally, hugging an ant, and he might not appreciate that.
Yeah, you always got to be careful.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's move on to the class abilities. So for the first level, so druidic is not like an ability, it's more like a language that the druid knows, correct?
Hmm.
Um
Right.
so and over the course of your leveling you get now in terms of wild shape in second level, so basically wild shape is basically the ability to turn into an animal, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then Druidic Circle is the subclass, and then
Hmm.
from then on it goes until you hit Timeless Body and Beast spells. Now, Timeless Body means you're immune to poison or age, I think.
You would age more slowly.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. And then Beast spells basically lets you cast while you're in your wild shape form.
Those are the higher level abilities, but
Yeah,
if you play a
it's
druid up to 18, you can enjoy those things,
and
yep.
then Archdruid is basically like the ultimate like druid
Mm.
basically. And then now for circles, so you have the land, which basically, if I'm not mistaken, land druids basically they focus more on like terrain and like being able to go over rocky terrain or rough terrain and all that. Moon druids harness the power of the moon to do all kinds of weird stuff. Spores are, as you said, about reanimating stuff and
hmm
mushrooms. Stars are actually kind of interesting. I actually don't know what they do, but they seem like a lot of fun. Wildfire is the one with all the fire stuff. What's the Circle of Dreams? What do they do usually?
Right, so the Circle of Dreams have to do more with almost like Fae stuff, kind of.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things they have is called Balm of the Summer Court, and if you do that, basically you have a pool of Fey energy. Well, when you have that, right, you have a pool of Fey energy represented by a number of d6 equal to your druid level. And then as a bonus action, you can choose a creature that you can see and spend some of those dice to heal them, basically.
Oh, that's pretty
So
cool.
yeah, the Circle of Dreams is kind of, like I said, kind of the Feywild, kind of Fey, kind of Druid.
Okay. And then what does Circle of Shepherd do?
So the Circle of Shepherd, I believe, is more about being kind of like a leader and summoning creatures. So like at at 6th level, they get ability where they can summon beast or Fey, and they get more benefits with those creatures. So if they have spells that would let them summon creatures, all of those summoned creatures will have more hit points and they'll have magical attacks essentially instead of being just basic as they were at the spell description.
Oh,
So
okay.
again, Shepherd is kind of like bolstering your flock, building a flock and building them up and using those kinds of summoned creatures to attack.
Okay. Would you say that druids are like they're capable healers, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of spell casting classes and even some like quarter casters that get healing abilities. But like with Balm of the Summer Court and some of the other things, they can heal. The other thing is with a wild shape, you kind of have a pool of not quite temporary hit points, but basically at when druids are wild shaped, they take damage on the hit points of the creature they are shaped into, and not their own. So they can really tank quite a lot too, which can help, reduce the need to heal.
That's crazy. Yeah. Would you say like if you were to rate like the healing classes, would you say like druid is like above paladin or is it below paladin?
I would say it's in line. Paladins have lay on hands, which allows them to heal as an action up to the pool that they have depending on their level, and they can do that to anyone without spending spell slots. Although I think they also would get healing spells. We'll cover Paladin here in a future episode, but I think Druids also can learn some healing spells, but I think they're both on par as kind of like emergency healers. If you have a Druid in the party, they could potentially heal you in an emergency, but I wouldn't choose them as the first option.
Okay. So you mentioned this in private, but you wanted to talk about like the druid representation in the D&D movie because I actually wanted to talk about that too because I was actually kind of interested in how they
Mhm.
portray the druid as a class.
Mhm.
Um,
So yeah, we talked about it a little bit in our review, so you can go back and watch our review on the D&D movie. But again, is with the caveat that a lot of DMs choose rule of cool over rules as written, and that's totally fine. If it's your table, you make that choice. But the druid representation in the movie was not 100%, right? Because basically the only class feature they showed her really having was the ability to turn into animals. Druids are also strong spellcasters, like we talked about. She didn't cast any spells in the movie, as far as I can recall.
I'll
And
have to watch the movie again because I do remember she did have something with a little slingshot or something, and she put like berries in there or something. I'm not entirely sure.
yeah, potentially. Um, the other thing is if you watch the D&D movie, just kind of a huge caveat, if you watch the D&D movie and think, "Oh, that's super cool. I want to play a druid so I can run away from, an emergency situation and turn into 10 different creatures in the space of 10 minutes." That's not rules as written. And like we said, if your DM allows you to do that, that's wonderful, that's great, that's fantastic. But normally druids can turn, I think, 2 wild shapes per long rest. So that means that you would, let's say you turn into an ape or a spider as our earlier example, you can keep that shape for up to an hour and then you revert back and then you have one other wild shape ability that you can use that day. Now as you level, these abilities can increase, but it is a small pool because I believe it is such a strong feature, right? Like we talked about in our example, turning into a small creature like spider or mouse that can go into a space basically undetected and, do recon, do scouting, and do all those things. Or you can turn into a really big, strong, powerful creature like an ape or something with a strong attack, tank a ton of damage, and deal a ton of damage. And you can stay like that for an hour. So there are limits to the wild shape ability, but I thought it was an interesting representation, at least to give people the idea that druids can turn into animals, right?
And the fact they made her a tiefling was just
Mm.
that was interesting as well. Um, one other like character in media that I never considered to be like a druid until I thought about it was Beast Boy from Teen Titans because
Yeah.
he changes into animals all the time. Like now he probably would have had some kind of special rule where like he could change at will. So
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure that's how that would work. But I think that's that I think overall I like the druid. I used to not like the druid because of the nature of it in older editions of D&D, but now that I've kind of read up on it and kind of experienced it, I think it was it's a really solid class, and it needs to garner it needs the respect of like, because I've heard like people say, "Oh, it's a bad class." Some people even compare it to like 5th edition Ranger, which when we get there,
Well,
which when we get there, oh boy, I'm gonna have some choice words, but
and I'll fight you with my words.
yeah, um, but yeah, it's interesting how like there's different interpretations of the druid, but
Mm.
I enjoy it quite a bit now that I fully understand it. Now I've actually gotten used to 5th edition and I actually understand everything. I think this class could, going forward, it could become one of the more powerful classes, and especially like it does some, it has some really strong spells. It's unique in that is it doesn't it doesn't need polymorph to turn into like an animal or something. It already has
Mhm.
an ability to do that, and they can put out, depending on uh the player playing or the needs of the party, uh you can be like a tank, or you could basically, it's basically the big triangle of DPS, tank, and heal.
Mhm.
But then you have like support over here somewhere, and they
Yeah.
have they have the strongest utility in my opinion, and their subclasses are a lot of fun. Like
Mhm.
if I had to pick a subclass, I would probably either go stars or probably stars or moon, just because those are so much fun. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bring a bottle of scotch, because we're gonna be we're gonna be talking about something, and there's gonna be a lot of stereotypes here. But anyway, enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you next week. Also,
Bye. Oh.
happy May the 4th.